to give you some numbers, we estimate that there are about 50 million people on the face of this earth today who are unable to communicate. Getting a diagnosis, regardless which one, is of course earth-shattering. If I can't communicate, hey, what's the purpose of life almost? But the vast majority of the world's population, disabled or not, hasn't really given that a thought. No technology is perfect, and the only promise I can make is that we ain't done yet.
First of all, this is my voice. I'm Tim Green, and I have ALS. This podcast is not about ALS or living with disabilities. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for me. I am a father of 5 with a marriage that's lasted for over 33 years. I am a #1 New York Times best-selling author of 41 books, an NFL first-round pick with an 8-year career. I worked on TV for Fox Sports, Good Morning America, Court TV, and Extra. I've hosted BattleBots, A Current Affair, and Find My Family. And I am also a practicing attorney. In this podcast, we're diving into real-life stories. From triumphs to trials, we'll explore the extraordinary in the ordinary. Join me, Tim Green, and my son Troy each week for real conversations, laughter, and insights. Because life is a journey, and everyone's got a story. My voice in today's episode is powered by 11 Labs. Fredrik Ruben, welcome to our podcast. As the CEO of Tobii Dynavox, I thank you for the work you have done. I cannot imagine life without Tobii. You have enabled me not only to do this podcast, but continue to write books and be a productive member of my law firm. Thank you for joining us today.
Tim, I do this for a living, right? So I am quite often in conversations, not unlike this one. My entire body, there is a chemical reaction in my body when you said exactly what you said. It's a sense of pride, frustration. I'm super impressed because I can, of course, not imagine what it's like being in your position. But thank you for saying that, and hey, right back at you. It's because of people like you who choose to live with ALS, not die with ALS, that we will eventually not only make the lives better, but hopefully together we will figure out a way how there is a cure to be found and reversing and everything. So thank you for saying that.
First of all, you are in Sweden, and it is a different world out there. You can go from extreme darkness in the winter to summers where the sun barely sets. How did this weather affect your childhood?
Oh, that's there's probably a long and a short answer. I have been fortunate to live in a number of places in the world, even though, as you well note out, I grew up in Sweden. And what I have turned out to really love about what we have here is seasons, because seasons gives you perspective. It also gives you a sense of chronology. And I'll say that because two years, me and my wife, we lived in Singapore, and Singapore is right on the equator, right? So every day is literally the same. All the days are equally long. The weather is, pretty much the same every day. And what happens then is that you lose sense of time. I spent 2 years in Singapore, and that is one fantastic memory, but it's just one big blur of a memory. I don't know in exactly which order we did things. Whereas if I look at my life in Sweden, first of all, with everything, you so much more love the summer when you experience the darkness and the cold of winter. But also, I'm a father of 3, to think about, we did that. Oh, that must have been when it was in the winter. Okay, but it was before Emma started school, and those kinds of things. So it gives you perspective and chronology and kind of a sense of time. But also, it's very clear that the reason why we love our summers so much is because our winters are quite long and dark. With that said, I'm a very outdoorsy person. I am very much an avid skier, mountaineer, sailor, all those kinds of things. So to me, every season has its golden nuggets, whether that is on ice, on snow, on water, or in the sun. There's something I love about all of those seasons. But you're absolutely right. This is we're far up north.
Did you do all that when you were growing up as a kid? Were you always kind of into sports and into outdoorsy stuff?
Yes, is the short answer. I'm a very outdoorsy type of person. In fact, maybe I should reveal, I also have another job. And sometimes, depending on who asks which job is the most important, it's a tough question, because I'm also a scout leader. So once a week, I go out with 25 kids in the forest, and we do all kinds of adventures, typically including matches and knives and fire and doing fun stuff. And that's my yoga, so to speak, but very much outdoorsy. I love sailing, skiing, hiking, mountaineering, all those kinds of things.
Where did you grow up in Sweden, and what was the best vacation you ever went on as a kid?
So I grew up pretty much in Stockholm, the capital of Sweden. But even though it's the capital and it's probably it's the biggest city in the Nordics, etc., and clearly a metropolitan area, I grew up on an island, which is attached to the city by a bridge, but still it's not in the very city center. And hence my scouting and my boating and all those things was just around the corner, even though I was 20-30 minute bicycle ride from the city center of Stockholm. But I'm a Stockholmer, so to speak. That's where I was born. My family, I grew up, I'm the youngest of four, so I have three older sisters, or sometimes I refer to as I have four moms. We typically did, I think the interest for nature and those kinds of things was as a seed planted quite early in my age. So we spent a lot of time out in the archipelago outside of Stockholm. We have some 20,000 islands out there. So I grew up, we had a small house on one of the islands. So out on the water or in the mountains or out in the nature. But then the question you had is kind of what was my favorite vacation? I have a very vivid memory from when I was 10, because my middle sister, she studied in college in Pennsylvania, in Gettysburg. So probably the first time I ever flew an airplane or so was when the entire family went over to visit her. So we went through Iceland and landed in New York City, and then down to DC, and then out to Pennsylvania, and those kinds of things. That was fantastic to me, and I think it's fair to say that my interest and my love for the US actually was planted there, and that was it had a little bit of everything to me. So huge memory, and now nowadays I'm probably in the US, I don't know, 8-10 times a year or something like that. I didn't have a chance to live for a couple of years in the US. It made a big impact and a huge impression on me to come to Manhattan in 1980, what is it, 7 or 5 or something like that, and experience all that coming from where I came from.
What is the education like in Sweden? Your English is perfect, and I see that you got an advanced degree in China. Do you speak Chinese as well? And if so, when did you begin speaking other languages?
So again, I think if we go up in the helicopter, Sweden is a small country. It's fairly large by size, physical size, but we're only some 10 million people in Sweden, and we speak our own language, Swedish, which has similarities to both Norwegian and Danish, but it's a small language on the face of this earth. So growing up, that is the same thing today. You're exposed to a lot of foreign influences, and specifically English. We have all the content on TV, etc., is typically in the native language, which typically then is English, and then subtitled. So at a very early age, you're exposed to a lot of English. You also start learning English in school already in 2nd grade. So I would say that, of course, I get the chance to practice my English a lot, but most Swedes speak more or less fluent English. So then that means that you pick up your second foreign language when you're in like 4th, 5th grade or so. So in my case, I have learned both French and German in school. And the educational system, it has a lot of similarities to the US system. We we call the different sections of the education slightly different names, and it's split up in the different passages. But overall, it's a very similar system. Maybe the bigger difference is that the prevalence of private schools was specifically in the past, but also to some degree now lower. So the public education system is kind of at least used to be much more of the norm. Then in my case, I went to university in Sweden. So I'm a master's in engineering. But the university is a 2-hour away from Stockholm or something like that. So still in Sweden. But I had a fantastic opportunity to take the last year of my master's degree as an exchange student. And that's when I ended up in Singapore. So not mainland China, but in Southeast Asia still. And one of the 4 official languages of Singapore is English. So in my case, the education was also in English. So I do not speak any other language than Swedish, English, German, and some French. But that's also how I ended up in Southeast Asia.
You got me beat. I barely speak English, so.
Yeah. With that said, I have a ton of US friends who lives in Sweden, and one friend of mine, she's married to one of my friends. She probably lived in Sweden for 25 years, and she gave up learning Swedish after 10 years because of the issue is that when you go to the grocery store and you try to speak your broken Swedish, everybody responds to you in English because you can kind of tell by the accent. And I think in order to learn a language, you need to be almost forced to be in a situation where you're in, Latin America or somewhere where you can't get around, you can't buy milk, you can't go by the bus or anything unless you learn the local language. Learning a foreign language just by reading books or going to school and not actually being exposed to it, I think it is very, very difficult. So, Troy, I think you're kind of excused for that reason.
I got lucky that I was born in an English-speaking country. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the U.S., we just started language, and I think I might be messing this up. I think it was like 6th or 7th grade. And at that point, it's kind of feels like it's too late.
Yeah.
But and then just learning it for 40 minutes a day in the classroom is not the same as like you're saying.
You need to be exposed to it and live it and hear it. And again, if you take back to my kids, I mean, they were exposed to English, YouTube or whatever it is from pretty much when they were born. So of course they hear English all around, and that's of course one way to pick up the language and the sounds and the meaning. And you're not that exposed, I assume, to Swedish or German or any other language in your daily life.
No, definitely not.
You started talking about this earlier, and in my research, I saw that you are heavily involved in the Boy Scouts. I assume that you were a scout as a kid. If so, can you tell us the 3 best things you learned as a Boy Scout? Sure.
So first of all, I think it's important that the Swedish scouting system never did the split between boys and girls, at least not during my lifetime, and maybe it was way, way before. So it's always been a mixed gender-wise activity, and it's very much focused on doing adventures together. And in my specific case, I'm a so-called Sea Scout. So the scouting I did as a kid, you're absolutely right, and still do, is typically associated with water. And it's typically around sailing, but not kind of who could sail the fastest between one buoy to another. It's about seamanship and, go from one place to the other, understand how to read a weather forecast, how to do navigation, and how to moor up and, how to be safe. I grew up in that environment. That's where I met my best friends. That's probably where I learned a lot about leadership, etc., which I, of course, get to practice in my job. It's probably a big contributing factor to where my fondness of being out in the nature came about. And I have to admit that those folks that I met in the Scouts when I was maybe 8 or 9, they remain my best friends. Those are the people I still hang out with when I in my social life. So it is definitely something that is close to my heart.
It's a thing I think was I think it's lost a little popularity. I don't know in the States, because when I was growing up, it seemed like everybody kind of did it, and now I think it's a lot. I think they might have even merged Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, at least locally near us. I think they go together because the numbers were dwindling, but it does seem like I've never heard anyone who does it for like a long time ever say they didn't love it or it didn't have great memories or all that.
Yeah, we've had a total resurrection of scouting since COVID, because that was one of the few things that kind of remained functional during lockdowns and COVID, etc. Because we already had the infrastructure. We were always outside, right? We didn't have to change. It was also a model which kind of taught people that you can't take life for granted. You know how to take care of yourself, and that almost became trendy with this. And of course, we have on this side of the pond, and given the geographic situation of Sweden, understanding that maybe peace and all those kinds of things cannot be taken for granted. So I think again, what the Scout kind of represents is the fact that you're being able to take care of yourself in those circumstances may be changing is gaining a lot of momentum, for good and bad reasons. But that's what we have seen, at least here.
The Boy Scouts of America has taken a hit in enrollment because of some terrible scandals. Unfortunately, there have been some cases where Scout leaders sexually abused Scouts. Are you aware of this? And has it affected the Scouts' credibility in Sweden in any way?
I'm very aware of it. I think we have been, to some degree, it's a slightly different organization in Sweden versus the US. And we have luckily had much less of at least what we know of. With that said, it's also a topic that we take super, super seriously. Because when you're dealing with adults who are, away with children, of course, that has unfortunately a tendency to attract people also with less noble intentions. But with that said, that's something we have all kinds of processes, etc., to make sure that we understand as an adult typically who gets engaged in that. Because just because we haven't had major scandals doesn't prevent us from having those kinds of scandals. With that said, that is of course applicable to the local youth soccer club or any activity that includes children. But we have not had the type of scandals or horrible stories that we have heard of from, for example, in the US, that I'm aware of, at least I should say.
I was a Cub Scout when I was young and loved it. There is a certain component of religion and duty to God in Scouts. Has that been erased in Sweden? I only ask because I have undergone a spiritual epiphany with my diagnosis of ALS. I spend a lot more time now thinking about my duty to God and my daily choices. Have Scouts in Sweden abandoned that credo for a more secularized version of the Scouts?
So here's the story, that the Scouting organization of Sweden is non-political, non-religious, etc. But with that said, there are forays which comes from either a Christian background or even like the workers' unions of some sort of political background. But typically, when it comes to the Swedish Scouting Association today, it is not religious or associated with military or anything like that. With that said, when I grew up, of course, the governing saint for the Scout organization was Saint George, and I remember vividly when I was a kid, we went to church, and on the St. George Day, we celebrated the gardening spirit, or what do you call it in English, of St. George. Sweden is one of the most secular countries in the world. So it has to be seen in that context. And it's secular in the way where religion does not have a big place in education, in extracurricular activities or in society at large. With that said, we are a country built up on very long-standing Christian traditions, and we're never as religious as when it comes to celebrating those, especially specifically if they're associated with the day off. But it is important to see the difference, which I, of course, can do spending so much time elsewhere, including the US, that it's a very secular, almost individualistic country. And when you see those researches on, individualistic societies, Sweden almost strikes as quite extreme. With that said, I think there's a lot of empathy and understanding and welcoming of, both spiritual perspectives, religion, or whatever. So it's at least historically been a very non-judgmental society, and that's something I personally like a lot.
By the way, the Boy Scouts of America has allowed girls for the past several years and will be dropping the boys from its name. So Sweden was ahead of the curve on that one.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know that, but that makes a lot of sense. If I look at my group of 24 kids aged 11 to 13 that I'm currently engaged in, it's exactly 50-50 boys and girls in that group. And I think that adds an element of better collaboration and group dynamics, etc.
What made you want to get into that? Like, obviously you're pretty busy with your job at Tobii. What made you think, with my little free time I have, I want to be in the Scouts?
I think it can be summarized with one word. It's payback. Because when, like I already then mentioned, I grew up in this, and I felt that it gave me a lot. I mean, not the least my best buddies, so and maybe my main interests. And when my oldest son, he's now 16. When he was coming of the age, we start Scouts when we were around the age of 8 here. Then it felt like a fairly natural thing for me to say, hey, I believe in this. If I can kind of give back to this initiative, which I personally felt has given me so much growing up, then maybe I could help someone. Maybe I could, contribute with, who I am and my time and what I do. So, life is about priorities. And to me, this was a fairly easy priority because it, of course, combined it with spending time with my son. And since then, I have been engaged I have 2 daughters as well. So my oldest son, Tom, he's still in the Scouts, but he wants nothing to do with me because he's totally on his own. He went to South Korea last summer, etc. And I'm not part of that journey. I was engaged with my second daughter, Emma, and now I'm engaged in my youngest daughter, Anna.
Us 2 Scouts could talk about this all day. So for the listeners and Troy, I'll get back to your story. How and when did you meet your wife?
So my wife, Eva, and I, we met in university. We met in a digital electronics laboratory session, and it was like an exam, but a practical exam. And we were sent into this room, and then we were told to group up 2 and 2. And I'm pretty good with connecting cables, but maybe I'm not the best in drawing the really nice diagrams with the different colored pens, etc. So my radar was on, and I was looking around the room, and I saw this girl with a perfect prepared kind of material in her hand. And then I said, hey, do you want to team up? And that was 24 years ago. So that's the short story. And 24 years later, I believe that actually summarizes our split of responsibilities quite a lot. I'm the practical guy. I am full of initiative. I get stuff done, so to speak. And she's maybe the slightly more preparing, controlling, slightly more organized, even though I think we're pretty organized, both of us. But it was a pretty good sorting mechanism, turned out.
Can you please tell us about your career as an executive and what experience has best prepared you to run a company like Tobii Dynavox?
So I think maybe one important thing to say: I've never had a plan. It's been very much, sliding doors and slipping on banana peels into various situations. So there's never been a plan. I was very much engaged when I was in our equivalent of high school. I loved music. I worked as a DJ in the evenings. I played in bands, and I thought, I want to do something that circles around music. What we had to do then, and now have to do again, is we had mandatory military service. So after school, I was sent up to the Arctics of Sweden for 15 months doing military service. And there I met a bunch of guys who says, "Oh, we're going to study engineering, because the good thing with engineering is that then you can do pretty much anything." And it was still when you had these paper forms when you applied for university. So I more or less copied the guys in my dorm and said, "Okay, I'm going to try engineering as well." And I had reasonably good grades, I should say. And that's how I ended up with my education. That's how I met my wife. I already told you. That's how I ended up in Singapore, because I did my last years of my master's in Singapore. In Singapore, I met someone. We started a company, and we liked living in Singapore because the sun was warm and the beverages were cold. And we started a company which dealt with mobile payments. And if you recall, 20 some years ago, there was this huge thing about ringtones. You could buy ringtones by texting and downloading them, and you could vote on TV shows, American Idol and whatnot. So we were kind of engaged in building up the back-end system to handle the charges. We did that for some time. That was fun. We eventually got acquired by this huge Swedish telecom company called Ericsson. And then I ended up moving back to Sweden. And then my wife got a job in the US, and we were about to start this company in the US. So then we moved to New York City. So there's never been really a plan, but all of that is, of course, I think the common denominator is I'm super, super curious. I like technology. I like international aspects. And I'm quite, I have a lot of initiative. I never kind of take no for an answer. I'm probably more American, to be honest, than the average Swede. And then one thing led to the other. We moved back to Sweden. I was offered a job as the CEO for a software company. That software in itself had nothing to do, but I was, kind of combined business and technology and leadership. Again, something I obviously got from the Scouts and the military and so forth. And then in 2007, I met these three guys who were my age in Sweden, and they had invented this super cool piece of tech which could tell what you're looking at. That was an eye tracking sensor. And I was always quite impressed by the cool things you could do by basically being able to tell what the person is looking at. One of the early areas of application for that was towards people with disabilities. So basically people who were then, for the lack of a better word, paralyzed or unable to move their limbs. And of course, if you know what you're looking at, that you could control a mouse cursor on a screen. But it was very, very early days and very immature. If I reverse the tape a little bit, my mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at a fairly early age. She was, I believe, 55 or so. So in parallel to all these things, me and my sisters, we were trying to figure out how can we make life as good as possible for our mother, which of course, my older sister is a medical doctor. So she kind of ran her piece of the game with medicines, which of course has a fantastic impact on someone with Parkinson's. But then of course to adapt my mother's life with all kinds of practical things to make sure that her disability limit her as little as possible. And then if you go back to my interaction with the three guys that had this innovation idea about the eye tracker.
Did your mom have Parkinson's before? Did you meet them after your mom had was diagnosed with Parkinson's?
Yes. So my mom had probably had Parkinson's for 5 or 10 years. So I was quite accustomed to the fact that medicine and technology in some sort of combination, and humanity can make a person with a severe disability, be less stigmatized, more part of whatever. My mom ran workshops for women who were newly diagnosed with Parkinson's, how to do makeup. And that, when you start to think about, with tremor and with the inability to control your hands, putting on makeup is complicated. That was quite interesting. And then in 2013 or so, long story short, we basically said, I would like to take the assistive technology arm of this innovation company that circulated around eye tracking, and I would like to separate it, because I believe that there's so much to be done in that specific foray, and it already had gained some business momentum, I should say. So it wasn't like just a piece of paper, and that was in 2013, and that's what I've done since. Now, unfortunately, my mom is no longer around, but I think if you think what you have learned about me, you can combine business, sales, technology, international opportunities to do things on a worldwide basis, and really affecting the lives of some of the most vulnerable and some of the user groups who are marginalized and not part of our society, using that, and you can combine everything into one. I mean, that's what we do. So I personally feel that, from my perspective, it's a dream. It feels like I have barely started, even though we've done this for quite some time, because we're barely scratching the surface. And the advancements we can do in terms of awareness, and the advancements we can do in perfecting our current technology, but of course innovation on totally unknown technologies, etc., to make the lives better for people who have the common denominator of being unable to communicate and speak with the world around them. I think it's meaningful and exciting, because it's a business for sure, but the consequences, if the business is successful, is of course very, very positive for society at large.
So when you first started with the other guys and you had the eye tracking technology, when you asked to split the company, did you take the eye tracking technology and those three stayed on, or did any of them come with you?
So what we did was we split up the company in 3 pieces. So the first piece was trying to apply eye tracking on consumer and entertainment, so PC gaming, virtual reality, and those kinds of things. The second business unit was focusing on how can we use eye tracking to understand human behavior. So much more in research, whether that is for Procter & Gamble to understand how to make the best shelf in a grocery store, or advertisement, or in research on concussion and dementia and whatnot, human behavior. And then the third arm was then the Tobii Dynavox, where we basically focused only on communication aids. And some of those communication aids are controlled during eye tracking. Some of them are controlled using joysticks and mouth switches and foot joysticks. Or some of our users, they have motor skills that are more or less 100%, then they use touchscreens. So eye tracking is one modality, as we say. It's one way to interact with the device. Typically, that is only relevant for people who are unable to control any limb. But if you have one intact arm, or if you have okay motor skills, then typically a joystick or some other type of device is better. But we do everything.
So is the company that you started with those guys, is that what Tobii is today, or is Tobii an offshoot of that?
So Tobii so what we have done is we have split the company into 2 completely different companies. So there is one company called only Tobii, and they focus on the 2 first verticals, the kind of technical integration into consumer and automotive and research, whereas Tobii Dynavox, and in fact the mother company is only called Dynavox Group. We only focus on communication aids, where of course eye tracking is an essential technology for part of the population that uses our products, but definitely not for everyone. To give you some numbers, we estimate that there are about 50 million people on the face of this earth today who are unable to communicate. Wow. Either because of something they were born with or something they have acquired later in life. We estimate that there are about 2 million people being diagnosed every year. So it's a fairly big chunk of people. Only 8% of those need eye tracking. The 92% or so, they use other types of ways to interact with your communication aids. So the largest diagnoses that uses our products are, of course, ALS is definitely one of them. And I would say that neurodegenerative conditions, and that includes Parkinson's, MS, and so forth, is kind of in that, sorry for lack of a better, bucket. And then you have cerebral palsy is a fairly big user group. People who have a brain damage typically comes from deprived of oxygen at birth. And the third bigger user group is people with autism. And of course, when it comes to autism, you don't necessarily have a physical disability, but you don't have language. 30% of people with autism never develop a functional language. And then there's a multitude of conditions that you probably have heard of and not heard of, Down syndrome, and the list goes on. Stroke and etc. is, of course, one big.
On those 50 million people that can't communicate, how many is that 50 million that aren't using Tobii, or you're saying that's kind of your full global audience?
It's our full global audience. The sad part is that we estimate that, maybe 2% of these 50 million, or even 2% of the 2 million who are diagnosed every year, are even presented or exposed to the fact that, hey, this technology exists. There is a way for you to compensate for your or your child's or your spouse's disability. So the vast majority of people, the 50 million, they are silent. They are unable to communicate with the world around them. They're unable to express their needs. They're unable to fulfill their dreams or, be their true selves. And that is highly disturbing. But at the same time, if I put my kind of company hat on, it's of course a fantastic opportunity to do something for, decades and decades and decades to come, because we have a lot of work to do.
Are there any tricks? It seems like a big number to not have. Is it countries that maybe aren't as, I don't know, I'd say not as advanced or don't have the resources? Is that why that number is so big?
It's for sure a fairly big difference from one country to the other. But even in the best functioning countries in the world, the richest economies being Sweden or Norway or US or whatever, the vast majority, my gut feeling is that it's still in these countries less than a 10% penetration. And I think there are traditional reasons for this. If you think about other types of disabilities, so you can't walk or you can't hear or you can't see, there has been ways to come around that since, the Romans. There's been, basic wheelchairs or carrying, and there has been, ways to access the world. But the concept of not being able to speak has always been, how hard can it be? Yeah. And then when, of course, and I don't know if I would ask you, Tim, and come to you with a bad proposal. Hey, I have bad news for you. You have to either surrender your wheelchair or you have to surrender your communication aid. Which one do you pick? And I think when put into that situation, of course, everybody says, yeah, well, being able to move around is totally irrelevant. If I can't communicate, hey, what's the purpose of life almost? But the vast majority of the world's population, disabled or not, hasn't really given that a thought.
Yeah, I mean, I never heard of Tobii or knew anything about Tobii until, my dad got to that point and the doctor said, hey, there's this thing out there, but I would have no other way of, knowing about it or knowing it existed.
That's a problem maybe you and I will tackle one day, Troy. Through the podcast, raising awareness, but also once we find a cure for ALS, we can help bring attention to other people who also need their voice back.
Hear, hear. Amen.
Tobii's a big company, though, Fredrik. Right? I mean, it's a publicly traded company. What's the market value? Rough numbers.
So if you take the Tobii Dynavox or Dynavox, we have a market cap of somewhere in the range in $700 million or somewhere. So a little bit under $1 billion. So no, we have reached a certain critical mass, but I tell you, we have barely started, because the vast majority of people out there who are unable to communicate, they're still silent. So I'm still very much on the concept that we have obviously figured things out. We've managed not to just the technological advancements and the hurdles that we need to get past, but also the bureaucracy. Our products can be paid for by insurance systems in 60 some countries. We have all the supports needed to, and all, the stamps and the labels from FDA and MDR and whatever kind of those hoops that you need to get through. Our main challenge is awareness. That the fact that a child diagnosed with, say, autism, or rather the parent of the child or diagnosed with autism, they are never even presented with unbiased fact that, hey, little Lisa will probably either never be able to communicate with the world around her, or it will be severely delayed. But there is an alternative route if you complement with not just sign language, because sign language is great, but it's only understood by someone who also knows sign language, right? But if you have technology and the types of solutions that we provide, Lisa can not only express her needs and her personality, the world around her can also communicate back. And it's deeply, deeply frustrating. And again, we have barely started, but the challenge is awareness. Most people are unaware of this. And I think you probably know this better than anyone. Getting a diagnosis, regardless which one, is of course earth-shattering. It's all the things that you had anticipated or thought about what your own life was going to be like, your spouse or your father's life was going to be like, or your child's life is going to be like, is all of a sudden, crushed. And the first thing that you do is not to seek, okay, now let's figure out the technology, how he or she can continue to communicate. You start by blaming yourself. What did I do wrong? Did I drink champagne while being pregnant, or whatever it is? You find all the reasons what you want to blame yourself as a parent or a spouse, or yourself for what did I do wrong. And the second thing you're looking for is, how can I cure this? And then a little bit later on that path, you start to kind of accept the fact, okay, this is a given. These are the cards. This is the hand I've been given, and now let's play it. And if it means that my child or me or my spouse or my relative needs to figure out a alternative way to make him or herself heard, it comes fairly late in the process. And I've seen snippets of that with my own mother. And of course, I can imagine the situation that you guys have been through, or any parent or relative. But we come fairly late in the process when it comes to, okay, how do we make the best out of the situation? And I already said it once, but the words came from, if you're familiar with Pete Freitas, who started the Ice Bucket Challenge together with Pat, and his mother, Nancy Freitas, who's a TED talker, etc. I remember she traveled to Stockholm to meet with my R&D team. This must have been 7-8 years ago or so. And Pete was then already fairly ill, and he was on the verge of whether to get tracheostomy or not. And they had made the family decision, from what I understand, to have him undergo the surgery and get a tracheostomy. And Nancy's words to my developers, which, you could sense the room there, was exactly what I said before. Because of this type of solutions, people choose to live with ALS and not die with ALS. And that's a very, very strong statement. But even as a person not in your position, it's something you can understand. Because if you're unable to express what's important to you, then it's questionable what's the purpose of me being around at all. These are big questions.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that that we dealt with, and Dad, I'll speak for you a little bit. But my dad was saying originally, he's like, he didn't think he wanted to get the trach, and we talked about life and what it would be like before the trach and after the trach. And one of the things that, I said to him is like, all of us, the rest of us still needed him. Like, it's not it's not his time yet. And one of the things I said to him is I said, listen, let's try it. And I'll make you a promise. If you don't like it, like I'll be the one that I'll take you to the hospital and we can, whatever, go the other route, but you got to at least try it. And the Tobii, nothing's perfect. No technology's perfect.
No.
I mean, it's let my dad at that moment that he had the trach surgery, it's let him not only experience and like just be there, but he's been a contributing factor to, I had one kid, now I have 4. He's got from 2 grandkids to 10, soon to be 11. He was at my younger sister's wedding. He's had, and again, it's not just, to your point, he's not just going to the wedding, he's giving a speech at the wedding. He's not just, Dad, I'm talking like you're not here, but it's not like he's just alive and happens to be a lawyer. He's one of the top producing lawyers at his law firm. Yeah. He's not just able to use his eyes to type. He wrote a #1 best-selling book only using a Tobii. Like it's a crazy, it's amazing. And things are slower and things are different and technology is perfect, but I mean, the company, the technology has given people like my dad and like myself too. I mean, our family has had, I can't even quantify the memories and the joy and the love and the happiness that we've had because of it. So,
but look at this conversation right now. I met the two of you for the first time in my life. We're having a conversation. Tim, you asked me how I met my wife. and it's not just blinks or whatever. It's real, and this is a large part of quality of life, etc. We are a social animal, and be able to do this is of course fantastic. And I do feel proud, but I also hear you, Troy. No technology is perfect, and the only promise I can make is that we ain't done yet. We're gonna try to make the disability of being unable to communicate as little of a limitation as possible. There will, of course, be perhaps for some time still, you're a little bit slower. It's a little bit wonky, and things even don't work from time to time. But it can be done much better. Even though I also try our old things from time to time, and it's like pulling out the VHS cassette and like, did we accept this? So it's fun to see how much progress we're doing in a fairly short period of time still. So that gives me hope.
Yeah, I have so many questions about like the business side of Tobii.
Shoot, I'm yours.
So how do you go from, you guys decide you want to start this to a $700 million market cap company? I mean, what was that journey like? And was there ever times in the journey where you thought, maybe we shouldn't have Dynavox? Maybe this is a feel good thing, but there's no way to really make it a business.
The fact that it was a viable business was it's a very, very important fundamental factor, because otherwise it will not be sustainable. I mean, you can do things because they feel good or are fun or whatever for just as long. But eventually you need to pay your bills. So we have built a fairly strong foundation and always been focusing on where do we really add value? Because when you understand that you add value, then there's typically business in there too. So always looking at what you refer to as, the customer need or the customer proposal. And that, of course, in combination, meaning that is there a way to get income from this? And in our space, our products are, 90% of our business is our revenue, I should say, comes from some sort of private or public or federal funding system, whether that is Medicare or Medicaid or a private insurer in the US or the VAs, or whether it's the Norwegian or Swedish public, state-run funding system, or UK or Germany or Australia or wherever. And what you can also do is then look, are we completely unique in this space? And of course, when you look at other types of assistive technology, again, wheelchairs, hearing aids, the list goes on. That is something that is also paid for through the same mechanism. So we've always been fairly business savvy. We've always been very frugal as well, not to overspend, because we feel this huge responsibility that if we don't run this company in a sustainable way, maybe the company would go bankrupt. That would be horrible for a lot of our users. So we have a huge responsibility to kind of deal with the resources in a smart and thoughtful way.
Yeah. Do you have to balance like the pricing where you have to make a profit because you are a business? And I agree with you. I think it sounds good to say, we do it all for free, but it's not sustainable, and you want something that's really going to make progress. So, but how do you balance that? The 10% that aren't insurance, right? I mean, or maybe if you're in a part of the world that doesn't have, I don't know, again, I don't have a specific example, but they don't have the resources or the healthcare systems. And, how do you balance that, the pricing of it versus accessibility, right? Because obviously the higher the price, the less accessible.
We unfortunately have to say no a lot. I think what we have two types of decisions. Either we make, a decision that is good for the company here and now, or we invest into the future, business development. But even when we do invest in the future, we need to understand that eventually this is going to be viable also from a business perspective. If we want to run a non-profit over more of a how should I put it, like more of a non-profit type of then it's better that we actually take money and give it to the non-profit and let them figure out. It's very difficult to run a company where you kind of should be both non-profit and commercial at the same time. I think it's difficult organizationally. It's difficult to run the company. So how boring it may sound, but we're quite, we evaluate a lot how we spend our money to make sure that it really has the best outcome. And in our world, the beautiful thing is that for every voice that we provide to the world is also how we expand the business. And if they can go hand in hand, I don't necessarily feel that it's unethical or complicated, but I can tell you that we're over 800 people in the team. And all of my colleagues, including myself, we're here for the purpose. Some companies, they go on these off-site meetings and they try to find the purpose of their business. For us, it's cheating almost. It's very, very obvious. But I can tell you that we have, everyone in my company are here for the reason, but they also like, high technology or international business, etc. So probably I have to spend a little bit more time than other CEOs to explain why doing business, and being business savvy is good for the purpose. But quite quickly, when you start to talk about what if we fail, what if we go bankrupt, to be honest, what if we build products with poor quality and they catch fire, some catastrophic scenarios, and the company is no longer viable from a business perspective, that's probably the most horrible thing that can happen to those hundreds of thousands of users and families and whatever we have around the world. So I feel a huge responsibility to run the company financially sustainable. With that said, there's a limit to it. So we can't be too greedy, and if I start to feel that we're flying private jets and we have obscene profits and whatnot, then probably something has really gone wrong, and it's probably not me running this company, by the way, I should say. It's not the scout leader.
Yeah, that's right. Is a company like, say, Neuralink, like with Elon Musk, is that because if Neuralink, if they make it so it's commercialized and it's, people are actually getting it. Is that technically a competitor to Tobii?
Not at all. It's just another modality. So I would be happy to integrate a Neuralink sensor to our communication aids and help them through the funding systems, and adding software that works for children with developmental delays or for someone with ALS. So to me, a Neuralink or any other type of sensor is we are indifferent towards that. And I typically answer, and obviously in this space we know each other well, and I applaud what they do. Mm-hmm. But I don't really want to be the company that drills those holes into the brain and puts a chip in there. But someone else could do that better, most likely. That's the scary part. If it can speak Bluetooth, I will be happy to pick up the signal.
And then the last thing kind of specific to this is you guys obviously are, again, $700 million company. You're doing very well, very successful. You guys are constantly working on R&D and new stuff. And I know there was a big update that recently came out. Do you want to talk about kind of that update and talk about what's coming next, what you're trying to get, what you're working on?
So we are, as you say, constantly innovating and developing. The model or the world that we operate in, when we refer to as the customer, we typically see three different types of actors. One is obviously the user, like you, Tim, or the people around the user, parents, spouses, kids, whatever. That's one customer. Of course, we need to make products that really works and has the right quality and technical features. The other customer of ours is the prescriber, because most, if not all of our customers, they're guided through the process by either a speech language pathologist or an occupational therapist or someone who has the role of making the patient's life as good as possible, over, compensating for whatever limitations the disability comes with. And then the third one is the payer, the Medicares and the Aetnas or whatever they are. And we, of course, need to meet the requirements of all these three. With that said, we do focus a lot on the therapist, because if the therapist is successful with the patient, then the patient will typically be more successful. And being a therapist, if you put yourself into the shoes of a practicing speech language pathologist, he or she, it's quite often a she, meets 40 patients every week. And each patient is different, and he or she needs to introduce this technology. So we actually have them in mind a lot. And that means that innovation and technology, it's typically about evolution, not revolution. Because if we come with something that works completely differently from the previous product, we're actually messing up their lives quite a lot. So it's very much perfecting what we have, making simple things such longer battery runtime, easier, faster charging, better accuracy, more robust, so it works on more eyes, more sturdy cases so that they don't break. All these kinds of things that basically makes the products better and better for every generation. But like I said before, when I look at our products, 5 or 10 years back, they feel archaic, even though that each new release is typically just making the previous generation a little bit better. We do have a lot of innovation happening, obviously, around machine learning and artificial intelligence, etc. Some of that we apply for our own business, how we develop, how we do software engineering. Some of that we apply to our products. We talked about voices and personalized voices before. There's a lot of really exciting stuff happening in that space. The third one is actually more about process. I just got a stat today that we receive in the US 1,800 faxes every day from prescribers. This is 2024. But for us to be able to manage all this lack of bureaucracy, either I could hire a lot more people and we can print more faxes and have people read faster. And of course, here's a fantastic opportunity how we are applying a lot of artificial intelligence to basically make the processes faster, smarter, less error prone, etc. So that's what we do.
I thought in one of your interviews, I heard you say that you have a child with special needs. Is that correct?
No, I do not have a child with special needs, but perhaps referring to my mother then. With that said, I should probably say, having been in this space for quite some time, it feels like I have hundreds of children and friends and buddies all around the world with various types of conditions. And it is, as a social animal, which I obviously am, I feel extremely proud of not just, seeing them as, names or identities. These are, I can take one example. If you ever checked out the website or the social media called All Access Life, it's two guys in Canada, one with cerebral palsy, and they're the funniest people in the world. And they're influencers and social media professionals, but they test out all types of accessibility tools and features. We are super close friends. We chat with each other almost on a daily basis. Once a year, we do meet at the big conference down in Florida. We definitely go out after the conference for a drink or two and have fun. And to be able to realize that, I have a super good friend, a 24-year-old with cerebral palsy from Canada, that's a blessing and pretty unique. But I don't have a special needs child per se myself.
Got it. Maybe you were saying that you think of the customers like your children, and I just got it confused. Does Sweden have anything comparable to the Americans with Disabilities Act, more commonly referred to as ADA?
Sweden is a complicated country to understand because it's very wealthy. We have also a system where healthcare, etc., is paid for indirectly through taxes, etc. So you don't need to have your own personal insurance, which means that I will get the same type of treatment if I am ill, and I'm obviously a wealthy and fortunate person, as someone who's not as wealthy or not as fortunate. With that said, the Americans with Disabilities Act, to me, did something very, very important and quite some time ago. It basically put an equal sign that society has a responsibility, and if I simplify it grossly, that if you're unable to walk, see, hear, or talk, in our case, society has, the law basically stipulates that you need to get help. The issue with a system like the Swedish one is that the law might be really good, but it's like hot potato. So, there is a child that comes in through one of the different forays, through, primary care or school or, however. There is a tendency in our system to it's someone else's responsibility, just pass the ball to someone else. And hence, what happens here is that a lot of users and patients with the types of needs that we work with, they fall between the cracks because there's no one that really takes the responsibility. And I think that the Americans with Disabilities Act made it crystal clear. Hey, society is responsible for this. You can't point fingers at, it's someone else's fault. So in my world, the American system, again, based on ADA, works much, much, much better. And that may sound weird for someone who thinks about Swedish or European healthcare system as, generous, etc. They might be generous from a financial perspective, but money doesn't make a person with ALS happy. You need help, and you need someone to basically guide you through all the complexities associated with being in your situation.
I've never heard that before. That's really interesting.
Yeah,
it's almost like a lack of accountability.
It's very much my interpretation. We even had a seminar in Stockholm, was it 2 weeks ago, where we brought in all the stakeholders and patient organizations, etc. And everybody said exactly the same thing. There's nothing wrong with the law or the support. It's just that there is no accountability. You can't point at someone who eventually has the responsibility. And I would say that this is not super unique to Sweden. But me being a Swede, running this company with a headquarter in Stockholm is quite painful and to some degree quite embarrassing. So we're going to fix that too.
Since we have you on the podcast, I have to ask you for something I would love to see in a future Tobii update. For example, I would really like better prediction software. Back when I could use my iPhone, the suggestions it made were very accurate, and that would save us Tobii users a lot of time.
Noted. And one of the reasons I'm smiling is that I know that you're not alone in having that perspective. The only thing I should add to the concept of prediction is obviously for you, Tim, you're there and you're aware. And if the predicting algorithm suggests something that you don't want to say, you know that too. But if you look at the other types of users that we're dealing with who have a developmental delay or a cognitive disability, having too advanced algorithms on predicting what to say is scary and could be outright bad, because then you could even question who's talking now. Is it the AI or is it the individual? So we have to kind of handle with care. But with that said, you're not alone, and the people who have the need, and you want to be able to speak faster. I think it's that simple. There's a lot of super interesting things happening. And again, it's not like we're waiting for this big bang thing to happen all at once. I think what we are experiencing right now is that there are incremental improvements and upgrades happening almost on a monthly basis right now. And one of the areas is what we refer to then as a rate enhancement, being able to respond and ask and express what you want faster.
I was going to ask that because it's a very individualized, like my dad's situation, even somebody else who has ALS could have someone else in ALS could live in the same, whatever, town as us, county as us, and have a totally different need. That's one thing that I think is it's so easy to blame technology or blame whatever the company it is, whether it's a Tobii machine or if somebody has an iPhone, right? But everyone uses their device, their technology so different. It is hard how do you individualize it? Because your response, I never even considered that. Because if you have the AI is too predictive and you have people who are using it, yeah, I mean, how do you know if that's really
Tim, even though I have to say, I think you're pretty fast. I'm quite impressed on how quickly you are, how swift this and smooth this dialogue is. Maybe it's important to put into perspective that back in the days when you had other types of switches, the typical rate of communication for communication age, say 15 years ago, was roughly 1 word per minute.
Wow.
And of course, 1 word per minute is painfully slow. We are faster now, but right now we're probably speaking at 200 words a minute. So, and my guess is maybe, Tim, you're typing at somewhere around 20 words per minute or so. So we have some way to go. Stephen Hawkins, he communicated with 1 word per minute, and he did have a fairly big impact on the world, and he had a lot of important things to say. But you can only imagine the amount of frustration writing a book or doing research or giving a keynote speak when the Q&A session was, how should I put it, somewhat slow.
Yeah, it can be very frustrating, but I try to just focus on the fact that I am still able to communicate at all. Fredrik, now is the time that I like to ask our guests to tell us about their family. Please feel free to brag about your wife and kids.
That's easy. Again, my beautiful wife, Eva, we're both engineers. It's fantastic in the way that we can talk tech. She's also a really good skier and a fantastic driver, to name a few. But most importantly, she is, of course, a fantastic mother of our 3 kids. So as the engineers that we are, our kids are exactly 3 years apart. And so our oldest son, Tom, he's in our equivalent of, high school or so. I wouldn't be surprised if that's an engineer too, a very good climber. He totally beats me. We love climbing, both of us, but I don't have a chance. I'm pretty good at securing him, and he's pretty good at securing me. But when it comes to the actual climbing, he beats me big time. And then we have Emma. She is 13 years old. She's a gymnast, and and gymnastics is not just about doing somersaults and complicated things. It's actually a little bit about show business and doing things on stage, so to speak. And then we have the real boss of our family, Anna, who's 10 years old. Anna is in our equivalent of 4th grade in school, 5th grade in the US. She's the boss. She's the smallest person of our household, but she dictates exactly what we do and how we do things. And I think I am pretty stubborn, but there's no way I can ever win on her if she has her mind made up. And this creates a fairly fun dynamic, but as a family, we spend a lot of time together, and we all, again, enjoy skiing, boating, being out in the nature, and that's what we do great as a family. So that's by bragging. Incredibly proud father. Exactly how I have contributed to that is difficult to say. My son is much taller than me, and he's much better looking. So and that's a blessing.
Now on to our final word segment, where we ask our guests a few rapid fire questions. What was the happiest moment in your life?
It's definitely something around my own family and us doing things together. And I have so many pictures of us, seeing the sunset from a tent up on the mountain, or from a boat, or in a ski slope or something like that. So I have a chance to experience those happiest moments quite frequently still, because my kids still want to hang out with me. So those are the happiest moments of my life, definitely.
What is the biggest adversity you've faced?
I think it's not so much personal, because as you probably know me a little bit, I don't take no for an answer. I don't see big challenges as something that typically stops me. But I am super frustrated about the fact that only such a small percentage of people who benefit from communication aids are silent. And I think we're doing everything I can, or we can, to overcome that, but it's painfully slow. And it's beyond frustrating, even because I think we have the solution, but it's just the knowledge is not out there.
What are you most excited about?
I have a big hope in humanity. So we see that over and over again, that when some of the biggest challenges faces us, at the end of the day, there are certain individuals or groups, etc., that stand out there and they take charge, and they have courage. And I believe a lot in courage. I hope I am part of the solution in the future. So even though we, of course, see a lot of darkness, whether that is conflict or climate or horrible diseases, etc., I have such a big hope in that there are individuals with courage and grit and energy to go out and solve things, that we can do it, even though it feels super dark from time to time.
Awesome. What advice would you give to your high school self?
I think it would be something around that. Don't worry. People don't think that you're lazy. I've always had some sort of feeling that, what if people think I'm lazy? And I am not lazy. And I think I shouldn't be too worried about the fact that you don't always have to be there first. You don't always have to finish first. You don't always have to deliver in every piece, because you're pretty good as you are.
That's awesome. What book recommendations would you have for any listener?
Ooh. I do read quite a lot, but I typically read, for some strange reason, less and less fiction, and more, educate myself. Currently, I'm probably one of the last people who are reading a book called The Silk Roads. I'm halfway through it, and it's super interesting to get the perspective of history, which is not centered around Europe, but basically to understand that, hey, what they did in the Far East and in the Middle East and in their what currently is the Arabic world was quite advanced before, specifically up in Sweden. We were sitting there with our rocks and trying to shoot the moose. And I like to kind of get the historic perspective without being too dry. So Silk Roads is, and I know there is a sequel to that book, which actually lost the name of from the same writer. That is next on my list. It's on my bedside table.
The name of our podcast is Nothing Left Unsaid. Do you have anything you want to say?
I rarely regret things. So I think the answer is no.
Fredrik Ruben, it's been a pleasure to speak to you and get the inside scoop on your products that I honestly don't think I could live without. Thank you for your time, sir.
And I can only say that I'm humbled by the fact that you even considered having me on your podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure, not only to get to know you a little bit, but to talk obviously about my favorite topic. And my promise is that I'm not done here yet. So we're going to continue to make your and so many other lives better. With the piece that we can contribute with.
Fredrik, the last question, we'll let you go, is one of the things that was important about the podcast, we didn't want it to be just about ALS or just about sports or just about writing books or any of my dad's background things. So we ask every guest at the end, who are a couple of people that you know personally that you think we should have on the podcast to help tell the story?
Maybe you should meet Brad and Dan from All Access Life up in Canada, because they are definitely not defeated by the fact of disability, etc. They take the cards that they've been given and they play them super, super well. And they do it in a fun way. Humor is an essential part of this. And that resonates a lot with me myself. So if you want an introduction, I'll be happy to do it. They are super interesting to get to know a little bit more.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks so much. Like my dad said, for all the hard work. And Fredrik, you know what else too is like just something to acknowledge is the company is a $700 million company. You're one of the main owners of it. And you really don't have to be doing this still. You're choosing to every day, and you could, sell your shares and move to a nice house and just relax. But so I can tell you, as somebody that affects it secondhand through helping my dad, all of us really appreciate it and the progress you made. And yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for being on the podcast. It's great to meet you.
Absolutely mutual. I hope we keep in touch. I hope we keep in touch. I mean, I'm super easy to get a hold of. I'm not as busy as people think, even though I'm not lazy.
You're not lazy. The only downside, Fredrik, is now if we have any IT issues whatsoever, I'm going to call you in the middle of the night. Just kidding.
Do it. I'm an engineer, right?
That's right. We'll put it to the test.
Okay. Take care, guys. Have a fantastic day.
Barclay Damon LLP is proud to be the law firm sponsor of Tim Green's podcast, Nothing Left Unsaid. For more on Barclay Damon's team of nearly 300 attorneys with regional, national, and global reach from our offices across the northeastern U.S., Washington, D.C., and Toronto, go to barclaydamon.com. I want to thank my partners at Barclay Damon for supporting this podcast, and of course 11 Labs for their incredible technology. If you liked today's episode, a free way to support the podcast is to subscribe and share it with friends. Thank you. A significant amount of these sponsorships go to tackleals.com. For cutting-edge ALS research at Massachusetts General Hospital, if you want to make a contribution, go to tackleals.com.